Hello strangers, I'm Amy. Before we get started with this video series, I want to remind everybody that this is not a substitute for mental health therapy or psychological advice, but rather a place to gain information about a mental health condition that affects nearly 8 million adults per year in the United States alone. If you feel you are in crisis or in need of mental health services, 988 is a national hotline crisis line number that you can reach out to via text or call. It's 24/7 and it's judgment free, and it can help you get connected with the resources you may need. So for now, sit back, settle in, and let's talk about mental health. Hello strangers, I'm Amy. I'm an ordinary person living in this world, on this earth, at this time, and I happen to be a mental health therapist. In today's episode, we're going to talk about trauma in the brain. Trauma can have a profound impact on the functions of our brain, in particular the areas that operate our emotions, our memories, and our decision making. Trauma can lead to changes in these areas of our brain, some that we're aware of and some that we're not. Understanding how our brain is impacted by trauma can better help us discover ways in which we can prosper and heal in healthier ways. So thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking with you today. So what happens when somebody has trauma? What goes on with their mind, with their body, with their soul, with their spirit, with their self-concept? Let's talk about it today. At the first sign of a threat, your body kicks into overdrive. Your heart starts to beat fast. You might get sweaty. You get a surge of energy. Your mind starts to have rapid thinking. This is the body's fight or flight response. Now, as humans, we inherited this skill from our ancestors. It's part of who we are. It's part of our natural makeup. Under trauma, both a single event or that complex trauma, which is that prolonged, repeated exposure, your brain starts to form around that. It heightens the fight or flight response. It creates things like freeze response, or what some of you may heard of, fawn response. And we'll talk a little bit about those later. But let's talk about what's going on when you have fight or flight, right? Again, it's a very instinctual reaction for the body to survive danger, survive threat. It's useful. We need to have it. But what happens in the brain is that natural fight or flight response becomes misguided. And why is that? The amygdala, which is part of your limbic system, as well as the hippocampus, they're like twins. They function as individuals, but they're very, very connected with each other. They work in tandem. The amygdala is very concerned with the emotional and behavioral functions. It's responsible for our strong affect, particularly fear and anger. It's also associated with our sexual responses. Now let's talk about its twin, the hippocampus. Hippocampus, its function is primarily around memory formation. It's what helps turn short-term memories into long-term memories. It also involves sexual arousal and responses. It also helps form behaviors and emotions. It's our instinctual thinking. The hippocampus and the amygdala, right? They really work in tandem. They like then to shoot over their communication, their initial assessment, if you will, and they inform the frontal cortex. What's the frontal cortex? The frontal cortex is our action, our mental and physical reactions. It's problem solving, it's our planning, it's our judgment, it's our motivation, it's our intuition and our instincts. It's our personality. It's our attention and reward. It's our social behaviors. It's our impulse control. When you have the amygdala in the hippocampus not functioning properly, now oftentimes what happens under trauma for the amygdala is it becomes very hypersensitive and hyperactive. The hippocampus tends to shrink. If those core sensors, if those core assessing operations are misguided, are faulty, are damaged from trauma, well, they're not going to be a good source of information. But yet, that's the information that gets sent up to your prefrontal cortex. And then at that point, prefrontal cortex is taking what they said and it's going to do something with it. The prefrontal cortex also becomes less active when it's exposed to trauma. It also becomes weak when exposed to trauma. So you got these really key essential parts, right? And they're not all working as well as they need to be working. And yet, we try to put something together. We have the amygdala. It's oversensitive. It's overactive. We have the hippocampus that's struggling to determine what's past and what's future to kind of resolve what's actually happening in the moment. And then you got your prefrontal cortex, that higher level of problem solving, the impulse control, higher level of thinking. When those things aren't working properly, a clear plan, making those decisions, choosing a healthy coping skill, well, they're not always going to be our best choice for ourselves. We do them out of survival, though. That's the thing. Again, keep in mind, the goal of our mind, body, and soul is to survive. When we were under trauma, or at the time that a traumatic event happened, we believed that the way we were responding kept us safe. If we don't ever teach ourselves that, although that was very likely true at the time that we developed it, it doesn't always match what is actually happening in our reality. The mind, body, and soul that lives within us, through our brain, through our nervous system, through our spirit, through our belief systems, through our value systems, through our memories, who we are, whatever and however you see yourself. None of that knows that the world outside of us exists. We have to make sense of it for ourselves. The body, it's just doing what it's doing. Understanding how the parts of the brain work and why our mind and our body is doing what it's doing helps us better develop ways, healthier ways, more deeply healing ways to be able to function in the world. Now, just like the brain can get impacted by trauma, those neural pathways become distorted or disconnected, parts of our brain shrink or become overactive, weak. Our brain also can repair itself. This is the beauty and the miracle of the human body system, our nervous system, our brain. It still blows my mind if I think too much of it. Neuroplasticity. This is the term that's used to describe the ability to repair things up here. How do we repair things up here? Well, there's lots of ways to do that. In the next episode, we're going to dive more into ways in which you can repair your brain and heal. Things include therapy, medication, alternative interventions, Eastern medicine, yoga, meditation, music, dancing, other forms of time. The combination of all these treatments, all of them can work. You don't have to do just one of them. You don't have to do all of them. Everybody is an individual. Everybody's experience with their trauma is their own. And not everybody is going to be affected in the same way. There's a lot of commonalities among us who have experienced trauma, but everybody is very unique in that. And you probably don't realize that you've been healing yourself the whole time. When you think about something that may have happened to you, particularly if it happened to you younger in your life or an earlier time in your life, think about how it changed you and the things that you did or that you said or that you participated in or avoided, both as a way to help oneself heal and to keep yourself safe. So all the while, you're moving along with how your brain has developed around trauma or prolonged repeated trauma. You're stronger than you know. You've been working on yourself the whole time. If you weren't here, that wouldn't be true. So simply by you being here, well done. Good job. So I want to take some time now to share with you some personal parts of myself and my experience that can help illustrate the things that we talked about today. So in the last episode, I shared with you that I grew up in a household where anger was really only reserved for my father. It's the way we were structured. Women in my household were to be seen and not heard. And I grew up in a very strict home, and this was the way that it was. When I would hear or recognize that my father was in a bad mood or he was mad, it was such a prolonged, repeated circumstance and environment for me that I became quite attuned to walking into a room, feeling that tension in the room. It wouldn't take much for me to have a startled response. If my dad slammed something down or he raised his voice, I would immediately have a visceral reaction to that. It would then trigger my inability sometimes to control my emotions. I might have cried at the sound of my father yelling. I would feel scared. I would feel scared. I would avoid, go up into my room. I'd stay out of the way. I wondered, did I cause his anger? Is there something I can do to fix it? And I would go through those series of responses, right? My amygdala was overactive and oversensitive. Didn't take me much to have a startled response. I didn't do really well with people being angry. You know, by the time I became adult, someone raised their voice to me. At first, I kind of went within, shrunk myself a little bit. As I started to heal from that, I had the other extreme where I got really aggressive and kind of fiercely protected myself. Neither extremes were good, mind you. But when I talked about before how all the while you're trying to be well, you're making changes, you're making adjustments with this innate ability to survive, that's something that I'm talking about. You know, I thought shrinking myself and being quiet or trying to figure out how to shift the energy in my home and with my parents, I thought that would keep me safe. Well, it was unsuccessful because it was never my job to do that. When I got older, I tapped into something that felt more protective, a little more forceful, a little more aggressive, and under threat rather than kind of going within. I really came out, right? And neither one of those are healthy and provided a lot of healing, but they were various ways in which I began to feel safe. My continued healing was really about unraveling why I thought I only had those two options in order to protect myself. What was it that I believed about myself? What did I believe I was capable of doing? Did I understand that I had lots of other choices and responses? And again, that took a long time. But through those kinds of methods, through those kinds of treatments, through that kind of healing, I've been able to rewire my own brain. Now, I have a history of having used medication to help me with certain things, had a long history of panic attacks, as just an example. But now, when somebody raises their voice, I don't have that automatic response. I'm able to have an understanding and control of my body and understand what it's doing. And my prefrontal cortex says, hold on, I understand what the body's doing here. Okay, I know you recognize it as these things, but I'm now stronger. I can decide what to do where it's not going to recreate another traumatic episode for us. Later in the show, in one of the episodes, I'm going to talk about self-reinducing trauma. How we do these things because we think we're protecting ourselves or that we're being safe, and all the while, we're actually causing ourselves harm. And that's a little deeper of a thing to be talking about, but I felt it important to mention here. Healing is a long process. It's a lot of unraveling a lot of things. So, again, this podcast or this web series isn't a substitute for treatment. If you think you need help walking through something that may have happened to you, please reach out, okay? I want to thank you all for joining me this evening and hope to see you soon. Hello, strangers. I'm Amy.